Hey everyone, Rick here, and I can finally take this video, a video that I've wanted to take for quite some time now, and that is my Dungeon Saga pledge from Mantic's Kickstarter project, where I finally received the last of what I pledged for, and now I can show it all off in one single video. I had quite a bit of it originally. I had all the painted figures, minus the furniture, but I was missing a lot of the expansion materials and some add-ons. So if we start from the very beginning, Dungeon Saga: The Dwarf King's Quest is Mantic's newest attempt at a fantasy board game. They have their Kings of War miniatures game, which is a lot like Warhammer Fantasy, at least in terms of look. But one of the coolest things about this new Kickstarter was just the fact that the box that it comes in is this book box. So it actually resembles a big tome, and it has magnets inside there that you might just be able to see that keep it nice and shut. And then, of course, there's a sleeve that goes over the book to really give you just kind of your standard board game box packaging with the little details of what's inside. So basically, what I have here, I tried to separate it as best I could. This is what comes in the base game right here. You have your 4 hero figures, and then you have a whole bunch of dungeon dressing, terrain, and doors. And then, of course, you have your bad guys. And in just the base game, it's all about the undead. So you have your necromancer there spawning a skeleton from out of the ground, which I just love that figure. I love the way it looks like the skeleton is actually coming up out of the ground. Now, of course, in the regular game, it will all be unpainted, but in the Kickstarter, I went for the fully painted pledge level, and so that basically meant that any stretch goals or anything like that also came painted, and I'll go over some more of the paint details as well. And then, of course, you have your cards. This little stack of cards here was the Open These First cards, so they have a quick start guide to kind of give you the basics of the game. Here are the main bad guy boss cards and also the hero cards that come in the base set. The bad guy will have or you could think of him as kind of like the dungeon master or game master, has their overlord panel. And there's plenty of map tokens and other pieces to punch out, obviously, with a game like this. And you have your dice, and they also, one of the stretch goals was this pack of these little map clips. I haven't tried them out yet, but from what I heard, they don't hold the pieces too overly well together, but we'll see. And so that is basically what all comes in the starter box. You have your guidebook, your rule book, and your quick start guide, and then, of course, all of the figures and accessories for a nice dungeon delve. And if you're familiar with some of their other products, Dwarf King's Hold, something like that. In fact, I have it on one of my shelves somewhere. And I just love the combat mechanism that came with that first fantasy boxed game they came out with. And they use that combat mechanism in this game as well. So then beyond the base game were all the stretch goals. And so one of the stretch goals was this pack of more orcs and trolls and goblins, which is just great. And then all these kind of evil, hellish, abyssal figures. And then a whole bunch more heroes. What good dungeon crawl would be complete without more heroes? And then the dungeon journal, which is great because not all of these heroes came with stat cards. So in this journal, are stat cards for some of these other figures. For example, there's Logan, the halfling fighter, and his stats. And that's his little figure right there. So for some of these figures that didn't have cards, this dungeon journal comes in handy. Plus there's lots of other things in here as well, different scenarios and whatnot. And then here's a nice little art print. I think, yeah, that's of the cover art. So that's cool. And then, yes, the Kickstarter exclusive book box. So for Kickstarter backers, one of the things they did, which kind of disappointed a lot of people, was each of the expansions did not come in their own retail packaging. So to kind of make up for that, Kickstarter backers got this nice book box. I can't remember how that was divvied up. If you had to buy all 3 expansions or if you just got one anyway. I can't remember. But so this is a nice little addition if you back the Kickstarter to store some of your extra components. And it looks really nice. The original just kind of had that reddish look, and then this one kind of had a darker look, which is very adequate. And so that was some of the stretch goal figures. And then I think this Return of Valandor expansion pack, it's been so long. I can't remember if this was just given out to backers as a stretch goal or if you had to back at a certain level. But this included one gigantic hero figure, the Valandor himself, and then Baal, this demon lord. And these undead creatures here are the same as the ones that came in the base game. And I think those were just considered stretch goals along with these hellish figures and these orcs. But in the retail packaging, the Return of Valandor will come with both of those and one of each of the undead figures. So like with all the expansions, there are obviously a ton of cards and some of the figure player sheets, and of course the quest book, and plenty of tiles and tokens to punch out as well. Then we can look at this expansion next. This is the Tyrant of Halpi expansion. So again, cards and some terrain mats, especially this gigantic one here that just looks like a huge dragon's treasure hoard, and more tokens and some extra character cards. And then it also came with the full base game's worth of furniture, and then of course the Tyrant Dragon himself, which just looks so cool. The paint job on this was really nice, and again, I'll look at paint closer later. So that right there was one expansion. And then the Warlord of Galahir. So again, more different tiles. And so just taking a look at these are pretty nice and thick up to today's standards. And the art on them is very nice. They are all double-sided. And then there's also this Overlord sheet for this expansion. And plenty of cards and the quest book for it as well. And then all of these character cards. So some people were kind of upset, and I suppose rightfully so, that we got a lot of these extra heroes as stretch goals, but you only got the cards for some of them if you backed these expansions. So for example, Kapoka, this Glade Walker Druid, you got the figure in a stretch goal, but you wouldn't get his character card unless you got this expansion. Now, there are some figures who don't even have a card, even if you bought all the expansions, but that's because the rules for them would be found in the Dungeon Journal, and maybe even some in the Companion, which we'll look at in a little bit. So this expansion, though, really introduces all the goblins and orcs. So you have these gigantic orc figures back here, and these orcs. And some of my favorite figures are these little tiny goblin swarms. And then the Infernal Crypts expansion. Again, tons of cards, and I'll break down these cards in a little bit too. Obviously, some really hellish terrain tiles and tokens, rule book, more character cards, and a bad guy card. And then all of the hellish figures that came in that. And one of my absolute favorite figures from the whole entire range was this guy here, Dreknock. And then, of course, these, I guess they're called Ifrits or Ifrits. And those guys are just brutal, too. And then we have a controversial add-on, the Adventurer's Companion. Now, I think this also came in softcover, but this is the hardcover version. I think you had to pledge for all the expansions or something like that to get the hardcover version, or spend a certain amount of money or something. But anyway, in this expansion came with character sheets. So if you want, there's rules for making your own adventures in this book, and I believe there might be some more characters stats in here as well. Now the main thing was there were a lot of issues, a lot of errors in here, and it's since been reprinted, thank goodness. But for example, I think there was one on page 9, all over the book. There's this reference, see the dungeon building rules on page XXX. So that was a big oversight. They left a lot of those see page blank out. They did include, though, this handy reference sheet for every single one of those errors where it's like that you can actually find what page they were referring to. So that's kind of annoying. But like I said, they did reprint it, and for the cost of shipping, you could order another one from Mantic. And this also came with more tokens and a ton more cards. And so the different kinds of cards in the game would be cards like the Uncharted Dungeon. Now there's rules in here for solo play, and this is kind of a build your own dungeon style thing. These different cards have different layouts just depending on, I guess, which which roll of the dice you manage to get. So that's really cool. I'm glad that they ended up implementing that. And similarly with the Invisible Overlord cards, which are basically what would happen if you were playing solo and didn't have someone to play the Overlord character. Now those were pretty much just cards that you might find in the expansions or the Adventurer's Companion, but basically in the base game you'll have your spells, minor and major spells, with all of their various effects. And then of course you'll have event cards, tells you what's going on, a ton of item cards, and the Adventurer's Companion reprinted some of the item and other cards that were found in the base game, but added additional ones too, and then different song cards and trap cards. And so speaking of traps, one of the add-ons that I had purchased happened to be the Trap Pack, which, if you ever followed the Dungeon Saga Kickstarter, the traps ended up just looking like little square pools of melted plastic and just didn't turn out very well. So some people got those mailed out, but mine didn't even get shipped out. They just told me, sorry, we'll credit you for those. We're not going to send those out again. And I did not pick up a pack of the Dungeon Critters. And so I said, hey, just swap my credit out for a pack of these critters. So they did. They were not painted, and they're not finished either. So I'll have to clip those up a bit and then just apply some paint to get those up to par. And so that's what I did with my traps credit. And then the other thing was another decision, I guess you could say, that met with some resistance, was on the back of expansion cards and some other cards are these Mantic points, where you could cut out the points and mail them in or redeem them to get a special legendary figure. This is the legendary version of the Mortbris figure. what is it? Mortibris. So for example, this is his legendary form. Here's his regular form. He's the main bad guy in the base game. But of course, with these figures, you can level up to their legendary sides. A lot of these hero figures had legendary forms done in resin that you could add on. But I didn't do that because they'd require you to assemble and paint them yourself, and they added no extra gameplay effects. But I did think that this would be kind of cool to have, but because a lot of my stuff was missing, I was missing a lot of Mantic points, so in my second shipment of missing stuff, they just decided to include him in there, which I thought was very cool. I don't know if I'll test my poor painting skills out on such a nice figure or not, though. And then we have some add-ons. So here are some bone piles and health counters, which will replace these little heart health tokens that you'll place on your cards to mark your damage. So they're just kind of nice acrylic tokens. And then these bone piles. So in the regular game itself, whenever you're playing on the map, you can figure out where bad guys spawn whenever you see one of these bone pile tokens. And of course, the quest books will tell you where to put those. But in the upgrade pack, they have nice, I guess they're just plastic. Let me take some out of here. I should have done that beforehand. But for example, here's one. A bone pile. So those actually are kind of nice. You just see the bones and a skull there and a shield and a sword. So those are definitely a nice upgrade. Give it a nice three-dimensional look. And here are a couple of the health tokens. Just kind of plastic hearts. Then there are these acrylic counter upgrades. So even more tokens, all sorts of various effects. There's just all sorts of different counters and tokens in the game. So this was just an acrylic way to upgrade all of those. These little stars are experience points. And these still have their paper stickers on them. You'll peel them off so that they just look like that. And then you can also get these hero dice and overlord dice. So on the 6 is the Dungeon Saga DS logo. So red and gold, and then these really sharp looking purple or blue and gold. And so obviously when you put them next to what typically comes in the game, there's really no comparison. The updated dice are a lot nicer. And then of course the Dungeon Saga dice bag. So I believe that is pretty much everything. All the figures, all the paper components. Mantic, they have really tested their customer service with this one. And some people aren't happy, but eventually I ended up being very happy because I got everything that I purchased in the end, and it all looks wonderful, and I ended up with some extras, and that's what I'll talk about next. I actually only ordered one of these packs of bone piles and heart tokens, but I received two. Same with the dice. I only purchased one dice bag and one of each hero and overlord dice pack, but I received two of each. Same with these acrylic counter upgrades. I only purchased one, but in my second shipment of replacements, I received two. Now the thing is, I took a pretty detailed overview video of everything that I received in my first package and sent it to my Mantic. So because there was just so much stuff, I just decided a video would be easier. And so they looked it all over. I also gave them a written email with everything I was missing and everything I had. And yet I still got seconds of a lot of stuff, which, hey, I'm not complaining. But I also received And this was in my first shipment. And through emails with their customer service, they said I should not have received these either, but I did. They said, just keep them, so I will gladly do so. And this is basically every figure that came with a base set pledge. You have 2 of these undead packs of figures, which would have come in the base game, plus the stretch goal undead pack, plus the stretch goal orc pack, stretch goal infernal crypts pack, and then an entire base game's worth of furniture and doors. Here's all of the boss figures that would have come in a base package. Here's all of the hero figures that came in the base package, and then all of the stretch goal hero figures, including the special resin figure for this guy, who he was not yet painted when my first box came, but when my second package came, I finally received the painted version of him as well, and his little base. And then also the return of Valandor figures. So there is a gigantic Valandor and the big